That was it. I don't think I'm ever going to have a single time where I do not have technical problems. Unbelievable. Yep. Wonderful. Okay, so allergy. Skip that. Good morning, Jordan. Okay. This guy. There we go. So it doesn't have. Oh, rats, really? Sensor introduction. Ah, here we go. $99. Okay. Good morning, Matthew. We'll wait 5 more minutes. I had sat upstairs and made a long video introduction to this week. And it takes a while for those videos to upload on announcements. And while it was uploading, my husband called me to go outside to see the fence that he had built. We are putting a very serious garden in this year. And the chickens, of course, need to be kept out of the gardens. And so he was very excited about putting up that fence that I had helped him until I did this to my hand. And I just sat down 5 minutes ago and realized that that announcement had never been sent. I was not designed to teach online. The technical stuff still evades me. Good morning, Sybil. Good morning, Madison. Give it a few more minutes. All righty. I hope everyone is well. It's really cold in this office, by the way. It's a great office. When we moved into this house, this is an old farmhouse in Pilot Point. It was built in 1892. And it was added on over the years. And so this room that I'm in is quite large, but it was an add-on. And it isn't insulated at all. So it's really great in the summertime because it's still cool, but right now it's beautiful outside, but I've got a heater at my feet that I will probably turn on in a moment. It's just very chilly in this room. And for those of you who don't know yet, space heaters are really expensive to run. Very, very expensive to run. Just tips to the wise when you move into your own place. Be careful about overusing those space. As a matter of fact, I'm going to turn it on right now because my feet are chilly. You might even be able to hear the little hum in the background. It makes its own poetry. So I'm hoping that you, ladies and gentlemen, have discovered that the Poetry Foundation is a great website to look into, to bounce around on. I hope by the time our semester has concluded, which is next week, that I will turn you into poetry lovers. It's not all stuffy guys with white shirts with lace on the hem dying of consumption in a garret somewhere. And let's see, we got Jordan, Matthew, Madison, and Sibler here. I do want to let everybody know that the end of the semester essay is going to be due May 9th. I believe it's May 9th. You can go to the assignments page and check. And I'm giving everyone the option, if they don't want to do the thesis-driven essay number 2, you can also do an essay on poetry. And rather than discuss that during class today, I will make a video about that and send that out in announcements. But you can look in the assignments section and you can see the description of what that is. Some of you may just decide you don't want to do a thesis-driven research essay, you'd rather write on poetry. So I thought that might be a simpler or happier solution for some of you. And we will wait one more minute. It'd be a really good idea if you have an extra window open on your computer so that you can follow along with me on your own poetry packet. I know that the image that you get here is really small. Can you see I need a haircut? My hair has a party that I'm never invited to. Lord have mercy. So we're going to revisit Ozymandias briefly. I just want to remind everyone that that poem, A, is very famously anthologized. B, it's a good poem. And C, you have a PowerPoint presentation in the week 13 module, and you also have 4 pages of analysis, the sort of things that you would want to do before you wrote a poetry paper. And I just want to remind everybody of that. So we'll go up here one more time. Good morning, Vanessa. Okay, so it looks like it's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to start and just briefly review Ozymandias, and then we're going to look at some lighter-hearted poems and some more poems by dead British guys. And I really hope, good morning, Lindsay, I hope that you enjoyed and have listened to or looked at the live poetry readings that are on our website. I can't play them while I'm holding a StreamYard class, because these videos are also on YouTube and sometimes there are copyright issues. So if you haven't watched them yet, they're very irreverent. They're great poetry. They frequently have been performed at poetry slams. That's where people get together and perform their live poetry to an enthusiastic and raucous audience. This is not formal. Nobody's in a white shirt. Nobody has any lace anywhere near the building. And poetry slams are a lot of fun. And I know that we're all stuck inside, and you might just decide to spend a little bit of time looking up YouTube poetry slams and see if you enjoy them. So let's quickly review Ozymandias. And again, I'm repeating myself for those of you who just joined us, but this is in your poetry packet specifically because it does show you a variety of ways to analyze poetry. So our poem, I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read. Yet which survives, stamped on those lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty and despair. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So for one thing, meter is kind of like the skeleton of a poem. And you want to be able to recognize it before you just read it in free verse. So here we've got, I met a traveler from an antique land. Good morning, Ray. So we've got ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. That's an I am, dum-dum. And there's 5 of them, pentameter. Iambic pentameter is one of the most common styles, one of the most common forms, one of those common meters and feet in traditional poetry. In the last century, poets in the English language started playing with form. And for probably the last 30, maybe even 40 years, poetry has primarily, most popularly been in free verse. And we will look at some free verse today. But this is an iambic pentameter. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines. So iambic pentameter, 14 lines, it's a sonnet. And I'm not going to reread these. I just want to point out we've got allegory. We have a history of the story. We have an analysis of how many narrators we have. We have alliteration, enjambment, anastrophe, synecdoche. There's irony. We looked at the settings, the meter, I met, the trap, the from, and en, glad. This is what you're going to want to do, by the way, when you do your assignment later on today. And you only need to do it for the first stanza. Whatever poem you choose, I just want you to do it. I don't want you to think, I don't want you to choose a poem that's really short so that you can do the assignment. Pick a ballad, pick something, pick an epic poem. I just want you to analyze the first stanza in this form. And I realize you may not be able to do the superscript, but you can highlight the beats and the meters this way. All right, so we've got 4 pages of analysis there. And I think this is a repetition, these literary devices. I just want to point out to you, this is something you want to review when you think about doing the assignment that's going to be due a week from yesterday. We're going to skip Sailing to Byzantium. It's written by an old guy about old guys. It's a great poem, and if we were in class, we would be looking at it. But since we're online, I want to move to something a little more fun. If you're interested in Sailing to Byzantium, written by an old guy about old guys, here's a lot of analysis of it on the next 2 pages. And we looked at Nothing Gold Can Stay last week. Now I want us to look at a poem that, let's see, can I make this bigger? My dad was really fond of this poem, and he used to recite it to me when I was a little girl. And if anybody here is in theater, it's a really good one to memorize because when you prepare to go on stage, it's a good idea to recite limericks, Rubber Baby Buggy Bumper, or Theophilus the Thistle Sifter, or I slit a sheet I slit, upon a slitted sheet I sit. Memorize that, and when you're at a party, if someone cannot say it back to you, take their car keys. I slit a sheet I slit, upon a slitted sheet I sit. So this one is a bit of a tongue twister, and it's kind of funny too. It's by Arthur Guterman, and he wrote it in the early 1900s, and you can read along with me. This is how it goes. The antiseptic baby and the prophylactic pup were playing in the garden when a bunny gambled up. They looked upon the creature with a loathing undisguised. It wasn't disinfected. It wasn't sterilized. They said it was a microbe and a hotbed of disease. They steamed it in a vapor of 1,000-odd degrees. They froze it in a freezer that was cold as banished hope and washed it in permanganate with carbonated soap. In sulfurated hydrogen, they steeped its wiggly ears. They trimmed its frisky whiskers with a pair of hard-boiled shears. They froze it they donned their rubber mittens, and they shook it by the hand and elected it a member of the fumigated band. There's not a micrococcus in the garden where they play. They bathe in pure iodoform 12 times a day, and each imbibes his rations from a hygienic cup, the bunny and the baby and the prophylactic pup. So you can hear there's a lot of alliteration and a lot of assonance in this poem. And also, I swear to God, this poem has been in this poetry packet. I think I made this packet 4 years ago. But isn't it appropriate for our contemporary situation where everybody, have you tried to buy hand sanitizer? Have you tried to buy wipes or baby wipes or anything? If anybody's been successful, let me know. But yeah, I just think this poem is hilarious and perfect for our time. So I want to draw your attention to line 7. They froze it in a freezer with that was They froze it in a freezer that was cold as banished hope. So we've got 7 IMs, and I always have to look at my notes too. So they froze it in a freezer that was cold as banished hope. So we've got 7 IMs, and if you've got 7 feet in a meter, I've got to look up my notes, that's a heptameter. So this poem is in iambic heptameter, but I want everybody, and if you need to look it up, it's okay. I will wait a couple of minutes because I know that there's a delay. Thanks, Marie told me about that. That was cold as banished hope. I want everyone to reply whether or not they get it. Can anybody identify the classical allusion to banished hope? Does anybody remember a Greek mythology story about a chick who wasn't supposed to open something? So I'm going to give it about 2 minutes, and I want everyone here to at least reply, I don't know. But give it about 2 minutes and see if you can identify, because as far as I can tell, there's only one classical allusion in this poem. There could be more, but I don't know what they are. There's a lot of irony in the poem. There's a bit of hyperbole in the poem. There's one allusion that I know of. I can't find any puns in here. There are a lot of paradoxes in the poem. And I'm not sure that there are any oxymorons, but I could be wrong. Hey, Vanessa. So Sybil got it. Sybil wins the internet for today. Yes, Pandora's box. Pandora wasn't supposed to open this box. And by the way, it's a very misogynistic story because the gods were angry at Prometheus for giving humankind fire. And they wanted to punish humankind for getting a little bit closer to the gods because they had fire. So they made this beautiful woman, I forget who she's given to. And Pandora is given this box from the gods. And they tell her, don't open the box. And of course, it's a tale about women's curiosity and that they can't help themselves. So she opens the box, and all the ills, the sins, death, disease, crime, poverty, illiteracy, rape, every murder and sin that humans can commit flies out of the box and just ruins. It's kind of a Garden of Eden story. Instead of an apple, she opens the box and she goes, holy crap, what have I done? And she slams the box down. And then there's this, she's like, no, let me out. And the bottom of the box is hope. And hope says, I am the one thing left in the box. And if you let me out, then I can allow people to at least live through all these crimes. So we have one thing. We've got cold as banished hope. So we got an allusion there. Now, I'm not going to ask everybody to look for irony or hyperbole, but let's look at, I think there's maybe one more slight allusion, and that's here. And this is arguable. And each imbibes his rations. If you imbibe something, you take it in. Usually it means to eat it. But in each imbibes his ration from hygienic cup makes me think of hospitals or prisons. And of course, the entire poem is about the extreme that some people go to when they're afraid of germs. Again, it's not really ironic, but it is kind of a funny coincidence that this poem is very appropriate, very topical, because right now we are quite literally and quite understandably afraid of germs. And here we've got a poem written in about 1920 or so by a man who's making fun of people who are afraid of germs. A little bit of US history. When World War I ended, we had an entire infrastructure of industries that were creating items needed to fight World War I. And some of those industries were chemical industries. And they no longer had a client in the US government for all of these different chemicals that were necessary for warfare. So they retrofit themselves to create the same chemicals and encourage human people to buy them and use them on their human bodies. This is what started the American mania for hygiene. If you've traveled internationally, you may understand we Americans are really hyper about washing our hair every day and washing our bodies twice a day and using lots of chemicals on our bodies. And this really started after World War I. And ladies, gentlemen, I'm going to freak you out a little bit, but let's see how many people are here. I think we've got 6 or 7 people here. I'm going to ask a question and see if anybody can answer this. I'm not making this up. And then we'll move on to the next poem. Do you know what Lysol was originally marketed as? It was a chemical. I don't know what it was used for in the war, but it was a wartime chemical. Does anybody know? Good morning, Beatrice, the dog's in here. What Lysol was first marketed as in the 1930s? The dog knows. She just woofed at me like, that's disgusting. Give me a guess what you think Lysol was marketed as. And the reason I bring it up, besides the fact that it's interesting, is that this poem is written kind of in response to the mania that happened because Americans were marketed to very aggressively and for many, many years, and we're still marketed for years, about an extreme level of hygiene, which is actually quite dangerous. Can anybody guess what Lysol was marketed as? And I'll read the poem again. The antiseptic baby and the prophylactic pup were playing in the garden when the bunny gambled up. They looked upon the creature with a loathing undisguised. It wasn't disinfected, and it wasn't sterilized. They said it was a microbe and a hotbed of disease. They steamed it in a vapor of 1,000 odd degrees. They froze it in a freezer that was cold as banished hope and washed it in permanganate with carbonated soap and sulfurated hydrogen. They steeped its wiggly ears. They trimmed its frisky whiskers with a pair of hard-boiled shears. They donned their rubber mittens and they took it by the hand and elected it a member of the fumigated band. There's not a micrococcus in the garden where they play. They bathe in pure iodoform 12 times a day, and each imbibes his rations from a hygienic cup, the bunny and the baby and the prophylactic cup. So Sybil said pesticide, Ray said bug killer, Madison, was it a feminine hygiene product? Lindsay, rat killer, Jordan, a drink. Madison is right. Lysol was originally marketed as a douche. Yeah. Fun fact of the day. If you ever get on Jeopardy, you'll thank me. Ugh. Okay. So that was the antiseptic baby and the prophylactic pup. We've got 7 IMs. So 7 is how many feet. So that's a heptameter. And you can look that up. It's in there's at least 3 different documents I've got in week 13 about how to tell feet. And you can just look them up. Now we're going to skip I Am a Little World Made Cunningly. This is a sonnet by John Donne. Again, it's groovy. It'll take the top of your head off. Who needs drugs when you have metaphysical poetry? But metaphysical poetry needs a day in class to groove what's going on here. So we're going to go ahead to one that you're a little bit more familiar with. You probably read Shakespeare sonnets before this class. And again, I would love to spend some time on sonnets, and maybe that's what we'll do for next week. I think I'll take a vote at the end of this class. But I want to share this one with you because it's kind of funny. And it's a classic sonnet. It's got 14 lines. And let's see if I can get this. There we go. So again, we can hear the iams. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted. Now, painted is kind of a clunky end rhyme. So a lot of times the iams aren't exactly perfect. But let's just read through this because we're going to do an analysis, not of the technical side of it, but what's going on with this poem. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted hast thou, the master mistress of my passion. The sonnet is directed to a man. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steal men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature as she wrought thee fell a doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. But since she pricked thee out for woman's pleasures, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasures. Aye, Madison, that's interesting. Points to Gryffindor, says Ray. And Madison has something else to say about Lysol. That's very possible, Madison. Now, Shakespeare's sonnets, and again, if you'd like to, we can make our last week on Shakespeare's sonnets. I'll leave that up to you. But the majority of his sonnets were written to a young man. He was commissioned to write sonnets by a wealthy man, and there are some debates about who that was. But the great majority of the sonnets are written to a young man who is wealthy and powerful and rich and gorgeous and all that stuff. And for whatever reason, he doesn't want to marry. And a lot of these sonnets are addressed to him, telling him, you need to marry. You're rich. You've got an aristocratic name. You've got money. It is your job to get married and make babies and all that good stuff. And as the sonnets go on, the poet seems to develop an intimate relationship with this man. Not necessarily a sexual relationship. I think we may not have talked about it in this class, but men would speak to one another in ways that we would consider romantic, but were considered appropriate to the time with friends who were emotionally intimate with one another. But this poem puts the kibosh on any suggestion that Shakespeare was having a sexual relationship with this man. Let's look at the lines again. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted hast thou. That's the first sentence. He's saying, you, my young friend, nature made your face so beautiful that you look like a woman more than a man. Nature with a capital N, Mama Nature, made you look like a woman. That's how pretty you are. Then the next line, the master mistress of my passion. I love you, and you are both male and female to me. And I love you, the master mistress of my passion. And then he says, you have a woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion. This is putting women down again. He's saying women are very changeable. Women aren't reliable in their loves. You are like a woman in your passion, but unlike a woman, you are dedicated and true. Then he says, an eye more bright than theirs and less false and rolling. Again, he says, you have beautiful eyes, but unlike women who look around and check out the scenery and flirt a lot, you are steadfast in your gaze and your gaze of love. And he says, your eyes gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. And gilding means, of course, you know this, to cover something with gold. So this man is beautiful and true and virtuous. And when he looks at you, you feel as if you've been gilded because of the value and charm of his gaze. Then he says, a man in hue, all hues in his controlling. And here we would need some specific understanding. In Shakespeare's time, people talked about their health as the humors of their body. And you had 4 different humors that made up your body. And if those 4 humors were all equally balanced, then you were considered a sanguine person, and sanguine comes from blood. If you're a sanguine person, you're calm. You're not too energetic. You're not too melancholy. You're not too sober. You're not too intellectual. You're not too much of a flibbertigibbet. You've got all of these things evenly distributed throughout your body, and you are a very healthy, very steady state kind of person. So he's saying his humors are all in balance. And then he says, in hues all his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. So men look at you because you're handsome, and women just go, oh my Lord, look at him, mercy me, he's just the most adorable thing I ever saw. Then Shakespeare makes his next twist. He says, and for a woman wert thou first created. Now here's where we get asynchronous poetry, that the lines aren't syntactically telling us what he wants to say. What he's saying is nature first intended to make you a woman. And for a woman, in order to be a woman, thou were first created. You were first created to be a woman. Then nature, as she wrought thee, fell a doting. Nature fell in love with this woman that she was creating. And since nature is female, and in this poem, nature is not gay, nature, till nature as she wrought thee, fell a doting. And by addition, me of thee defeated. By adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. What the lines are saying is nature fell in love with you, so she made you into a boy. And specifically, by addition me of thee defeated by adding one thing. Thing was slang for genitalia, particularly penis, although it could be both male or female genitalia. So no thing. By adding one thing, by adding a penis to my purpose, I can't love you anymore because I love you, but I can't love you that way because you're a boy. And yes, but since she pricked thee out, it meant the same thing it means now. But since she pricked thee out, so we have a pun, for woman's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. This is not a sonnet that you're going to be taught in high school because of the topic, but Shakespeare writes this very funny sonnet about the fact that, yes, you are probably the son of my patron. I've been asked to write all these poems, these sonnets about you and to you, suggesting that it's time for you to marry, but you're really gorgeous and I think you're wonderful. Too bad you're a guy. So I wanted to share that with you because it's a funny sonnet, and that's usually not a sonnet that we focus on in Shakespeare studies, and it's just kind of fun. We're going to skip over Dover Beach as well. I lied. I'm just going to read the first stanza of Dover Beach because I want you to be able to identify this is a poem that's primarily written in free verse. And that means it doesn't subscribe to a particular form. It's not a sonnet. It's not a villanelle. It's not a sestina. It's not a ballad. It's not a haiku. But it still has identifiable meters in it. The sea is calm tonight. We've got three what? What is that? The sea is calm tonight. I want to hear from everybody. What is that what type of foot is that? The sea is calm tonight. We got three of them. What is it? Is it a trochee? Is it an anapest? Is it an iamb? Is it a spondee? Hey, puppy. What you doing? Come here, sweetheart. You're too short for anybody to see you. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand. It's not perfectly in this particular foot. And a foot is an iamb, a trochee, a spondee, a anapest. So tell me what you think the foot is in this particular one. There's three of them here. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair. There's four of them in the second line. Upon the straits, on the French coast, the light. We've got 5.5 in the third one. And then we've got gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stands. We've got 3, 4, and 5, 5. So what kind of foot is it? Is it an iamb, a trochee, an anapest, or a spondee? Okay, and then we're going to go on to my last Duchess. Yep, Jordan's got it. Let's see if we can hear from anybody else. Give it a few more minutes. So this is, again, if we were in class, we would be going over this. This particular packet has an awful lot of poems by dead white guys, which is why I also want you to hear some poetry slams. That's okay. It's okay if you don't recognize it. Scansion is difficult, and I will be the first one to say I'm not always good at it. Scansion is just one of those things. It's nice to be able to identify it because it helps you understand how the poet wants you to read it. There is a beat to scansion. So the let me hold up something here. This is one of the documents that's in your week 13 module, and that's really, really helpful. So the foot is The foot, it can be an iamb, it can be a trochee, it can be an anapest, it can be a dactyl. So an iamb is what it is. It's iamb. The da-dum is one iamb. So if we've got da-dum, 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 if we've got three iambs, that's iambic trimeter because we've got three of them. If we've got four iambs, ba-bum, 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 and I don't have these memorized, four iambs is a tetrameter, iambic tetrameter. If we've got five iambs, and that's the most common one, ba-bum, 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 most sonnets have those. Five iambs is five da-dums, five iambs, and since there's five of them, that's pentameter. So the foot is do-do, which is an iamb, or da-da-dum. Anapest goes ba-da-dum. So and if you've got five anapests, you've got anapest pentameter. So the meter is the eater, and the foot is the name of what kind of beat it is. And don't worry, we won't do this too much. I just want you to be aware of it, and it is partially the exercise that you're doing today. Oh, shoot. That's one of the two places I sliced my finger last week. All right. We're going to move on from My Last Duchess, and we're going to get to... I'm just skipping all the ones by the dead white guys. This is a dead white guy too, but he's an American dead white guy. So I want us to look at this one because it's a wonderful example of an ode, but it's also an ironic ode. And I will admit that Alan Dugan is one of my favorite poets of the 20th century. He was a hilarious guy who lived a long time. He won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry at the beginning of his career and at the end of his career. He only died recently. He lived a good long while, and he was a World War II vet. So I want us to look at this one. This is called, it's by Alan Dugan, and looks like those still work. These are links to two other of his poems that I'm fond of, but we're going to look at this one. So it's called Funeral Oration for a Mouse, and I can't quite get all of it on one page. Maybe I can. And again, this is in your packet. It's on page 38 in your packet. I don't presume you have it printed out, but if you want to open a second page on your screen and open up the PDF of the poetry packet, it's on page 38. So this is a free verse poem, and it's an elegy because it's about something that's dead. It's a meditation, and it's to a mouse. So let's hear how this sounds. Funeral Oration for a Mouse. And I'll just have to move this a little bit if you're following along on the screen. This lord was an anxious brother and a living diagram of fear, full of help. Hang on a second, I gotta get the dog out of here, honey. And she has been treated for fleas, by the way. Out you go. Everybody got their flea treatment to the tune of $276. Boy, is that stuff expensive, but she's still scratching because she's a dog. Let's start over again. Funeral Oration for a Mouse. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to read it here. It's a little bit easier. This lord was an anxious brother and a living diagram of fear. Full of health himself, he brought diseases like a gift to give his host. Masked in a cat's mustache, but sounding like a bird, he was a ghost of lesser noises and a kitchen pest, for whom some ladies stand on chairs. So, Lord, accept our felt, though minor guilt, for an ignoble foe and ancient sin, the murder of a guest who shared our board. Just once he ate too slowly, dying in a trap from necessary hunger and a broken back. Humors of love aside, the mousetrap was our own opinion of the mouse. But for the mouse, it was the tree of knowledge with its consequential fruit, the true cross and the gate of hell. Even to approach it makes him like or better than its maker. His courage as a spoiler never once impressed us, but to go out cautiously at night into the dining room, what bravery, what hunger. younger by far. In dying, he was older than us all. His mobile tail and nose spasmed in the pinch of our annoyance. Why then, at that snapping sound, did we, victorious, begin to laugh without delight? This up if you're following along. Our stomachs, deep in an analysis of their own stolen baits and asking, Lord host, to whom are we the pests, contracted and demanded a retreat from our machine and its effect of death, as if the mouse's fingers, skinnier than hairpins and as breakable as cheese, could grasp our grasping lives, and in their drowning moment, pull us under two into the common death beyond the mousetrap. Okay, so kind of silly. I know, Lindsay. I would love for the dog to stay, but she was getting loud. The poem could easily slide into bathos. And if you remember your rhetoric, pathos is a rhetorical strategy by which we try and reach people by their emotions. We tell them anecdotes. What if this was your son and he was standing outside in the rain? How would you feel if he couldn't get it? So pathos asks us to make an appeal to emotions, and bathos tips over into ludicrousness, like, oh, this is too much, this is silly. But he manages not to slip into bathos. If you look at the actual style of the poem itself, to me, it almost looks like an altar. And this is the way that Dugin designed it. There's just no way I can make us look at all of this. But let's look at the first stanza, because there's an awful lot of allusion. There's a lot of simile and metaphor here, and a lot of symbolism. So this Lord was an anxious brother and a living diagram of fear. So have you ever watched a mouse? I mean, if any of you have cats and they've ever caught a mouse, it's kind of hard to see what goes on. But I've had cats all my life. On more than one occasion, I've heard a cat and a mouse duking it out and then nothing. And the next day I'll get up and a mouse will be somewhere hiding and I'll find him. He's like, don't tell him, I'm here. I'm on my way. I'm almost. I've seen mice who can be very brave, but if you've ever encountered a mouse, it's a tiny little thing and it knows it's tiny and it will quiver and it'll shake. So he's kind of rendered that for us in our imagination, an anxious brother. And notice he uses the word brother. That's very important because this is a poem that has religious sentiments in it. An anxious brother and a living diagram of fear. Everything wants to kill a mouse. Full of health himself, he brought diseases like a gift to give his host. So if you really wanted to analyze this poem, we've got brother, gift, and host. And of course, host means something for Catholics about the Eucharist. I'm not going to go that much into analysis. I just want to walk us through some of the symbols that we've got here. So we have a mouse that's being described as a brother. We've got a mouse who brings a host, the person whose home it is, a gift. Okay, so that's important too. Masked, and now we've got similes and metaphors. Masked in a cat's mustache, sounding like a bird. He was a ghost of lesser noises and a kitchen pest. We've got the word ghost here too, brother, host, ghost. So there's a lot of Catholic symbolism, but let's go on. He was a ghost of lesser noises and a kitchen pest. And now we've got some humor. For whom some ladies stand on chairs. Eek, a mouse. So Lord, now this meditation addresses God. So Lord, accept our felt though minor guilt for an ignoble foe and ancient sin, the murder of a guest who shared our board. Again, we've got our allusion to classical Greek and Roman mythology. All the cultures that we now consider Greece and Rome and the Middle East share a common tradition, and that is when a stranger comes to your door, they are your guest. If you bring them into your house, they are your guest, and you must protect them at all costs. You will slaughter the fatted calf. You will give them the best food, the best wine, the best bed. You might give them clothes. To murder someone who is a guest in your house is a terrible sin. It is a crime. It is a crime against tradition, and there are reasons for that. If small communities get a reputation for being unkind to strangers and guests, bad things can happen. So that ignoble foe, he's saying that we are the foe. This mouse came into my house as a guest. He was my guest. and I am his foe, the murder of a guest who shared our board. So we've got a lot of symbolism. Again, there's a lot of religious symbolism, but you can just bypass that and look at the classical tradition of honoring someone who comes into your house. And remember, the mouse brought a gift. Okay, it was disease, but we've still got that word of gift. Just once he ate too slowly, dying in our trap from necessary hunger and a broken back. So here he makes a poetic terminology of a mousetrap. And if you've ever seen one, it is a pretty cruel way to kill an animal. I will not have them in my house. I actually don't mind a few mice in my house. But it's a cruel way because it doesn't necessarily kill a creature right away. Necessary hunger and a broken back is what kills the mouse. So then remember I mentioned humors. We have that word again, humors of love aside. All right, he's saying, let's forget the emotion of love. Let's put that aside. Let's consider the mousetrap. The mousetrap was our own opinion of the mouse. This is what I think of you, buddy. Here, come eat the cheese. I'm going to kill you. This was our opinion of the mouse. But now look at the symbolism here. But for the mouse, it was the tree of knowledge with its consequential fruit, the true cross, and the gates of hell. We have here life, death, and resurrection. It was the true cross because he ate too slowly. And who ate what from a tree of knowledge? Somebody ate an apple from a tree of knowledge. And it didn't turn out well for that couple. So we have life, death, and resurrection in, but for the mouse, it was the tree of knowledge with its consequential fruit, the true cross, and the gates of hell. And here we have the part that really gets to, if you'll excuse the expression, the meat of the poem. Even to approach him, even to approach it, the mousetrap, the tree of knowledge, the gates of hell, the true cross, even to approach it makes him like or better than its maker. His courage as a spoiler never once impressed us, but to go out cautiously at night into the dining room, what bravery, what hunger. The poet is suggesting that in some ways the mouse is more noble, because if the mousetrap is the tree of knowledge, the consequential fruit, the true cross, and the gates of hell, that means the mousetrap symbolizes the mouse's God. It is all things. It is the tree of knowledge, fruit, food, the true cross, sacrifice, and the gates of hell. I don't think he's suggesting that the mouse is going to hell. I think his poem kind of kept him constrained there, but we've got life, death, and resurrection. The mouse is approaching its God in the mousetrap. Younger by far, in dying, he was older than us all. This is a creature pre-human who understands about the courage of approaching one's God, even if it means the ending of one's life. And then he gets very brief in his poetic description of the death of the mouse. His mobile tail and nose spasmed in the pinch of our annoyance. And the pinch of our annoyance is a metaphor for the snapping of the mousetrap. Why then, at that snapping sound, did we victorious begin to laugh without delight? The final stanza of the poem addresses the guilt that, okay, you're a householder, you don't want mice in your house, so you kill them with a mousetrap. But this poem is meditating on who is braver in this scenario and who is the pest, because humans are on top of the food chain because we have tools. Before we had tools, we don't really have claws, we don't really have teeth. We were not always on the top of the food chain, and I would say that there's an implicit suggestion of that here. But let's look at the last stanza. Our stomachs deep in an analysis. Remember when you eat, your stomach kind of rumbles a little bit afterwards? Our stomach deep in an analysis of their own stolen baits, and asking, Lord, host. Our God is our host now. He is a guest in God's house. Lord host, to whom are we the pests? Who are humans pests to? That's a very philosophical question. Lord host, to whom are we the pests? Our stomachs contracted and demanded a retreat from our machine and its effects of death. It doesn't want to consider the mousetrap anymore. As if the mouse's fingers, and this is a beautiful line. Think of this, because if you've ever held a mouse, they've got these teeny tiny little fingers. It is extraordinary. As if the mouse's fingers, skinnier than hairpins and as breakable as cheese. That's an extraordinary line. Skinnier than hairpins and as breakable as cheese, could grasp our lives and in their drowning movement pull us too into the common death beyond the mousetrap. There's a lot of analysis that can be engaged with this poem. There's a lot of stuff going on. But one of the reasons I like it, if you haven't figured out by now, I'm a real softie to animals. And I do despise poisoning animals and mousetraps. Keep your house clean enough, you won't have that problem. But the poem is suggesting that all of us are equal, that all of us have our place, and that because there's a pecking order that humans have created, the mice suffer in ways that humans do not, but that the mouse itself is more noble and more courageous in its pursuit of what it needs to live. And it's willing to face down the most frightening thing, its God, in the thing that provides it both life and death than humans are. So it's a meditation that doesn't quite fall into bathos, and that I believe the poem itself is shaped a little bit like an altar. That's just my subjective opinion. And I am a very big fan of Alan Dugan. And so I wanted to share that with you. Let's see, is there, what do we got here, 10:43. Okay, we are going to skip the rest of these. I do want you to read the entire poetry packet. It's good for you. We're talking about literary, cultural literary intelligence. So I do want you to read the whole packet. But I made this for everyone last night to help with the assignment. So maybe we should look at the assignment first. Hang on a second. I'm going to pull that up. So we're going to go to assignments and week 13 assignment types of poems due April 21st. Let's pull that guy up. Let's minimize my screen. And okay, so we're looking at the right thing. So types of poems. So you're going to be doing this anytime today. You can do this. Review the PowerPoint presentation below. And it's not pulling up, but this assignment is also in your week 14 module, and there is a PowerPoint there. I don't know why it's not pulling up here, but this is about types of poems. And then complete the following assignment. It should be done on the discussion board today. It's open right now, and it'll be open till 10 a.m. tonight. Select 2 types of poems and provide an example of each. Now, I'm going to walk us through examples of a number of these poems. An acrostic poem is one that's actually made so that the words go this way and this. And I didn't find an example of that one. I've never quite liked acrostic poems. I think they're more a stunt than poem. So you can choose a sonnet, a sestina, a haiku, a villanelle, an elegy, an ode, a narrative, a ballad, or a prose. And prose poems are primarily the sort of poetry we've been writing for about the last 40 or 50 years. This is poetry that is poetry, but it doesn't really rhyme. It doesn't have an identifiable meter or form, and most contemporary poetry is considered prose poetry. So I want you to choose 2 poems, a sestina and a villanelle, or 1 elegy and a narrative poem. It can't be 2 haikus. It can't be 2 sonnets, for example. It's got to be 1 of each. Identify what the poem is, an elegy or sonnet, and identify the message that you think the poem is conveying. And I want you to identify 2 poetic elements, similes, metaphors, personification. You can identify its meter, its foot. You can scan it if you want to. You can find the poems at the Poetry Organization, and be sure and provide the author's name and the link to the poem in your assignment. So this is what you're going to be looking at today. And let me get rid of that and stop screen. Okay, and share screen with this guy. There we go. All right, so this is on your week 14 module, and I just want to walk us through a couple of different styles of poems. I'm not asking you to recognize a style of poem when you look at it. You're not going to look at a poem and go, oh my gosh, that's a villanelle. So it's fine if you want to type in on Google examples of poems that are villanelles. That's fine. I don't expect anybody to memorize these forms. I just want you to know that they exist. So what's a villanelle? That's a weird way. I guess we just have to do this. Okay, so it's a poetic form with 19 lines and a strict pattern of repetition and a rhyme scheme. And Campbell McGrath wrote a villanelle that makes fun of villanelles, and this is how it goes. Bouncing along like a punch-drunk belle, its provincial shoes too tight for English feet, the villanelle is a form from hell. Balletic as a tapir, strong as a gazelle, strict rhyme and formal meter keep a beat, as tiresome as a punch-drunk belle. Hop talking hip-hop at the IHOP, no substitutions. On menu items, no fries with the chimichanga, no extra syrup. What the hell was that? Where did my rhyme go? Compel, almost missed it again. Damn, can you feel the heat coming off this sucker? Red hot, ding, sound of a bell. Hey, do I look like a bellhop to you, like an elevator operator, like a trained monkey or a parakeet singing in my cage? Get the hell out of the poetry hotel, defeat, mesquite, 'tis meet, repeat, bouncing all along like a punch-drunk bell. The villanelle is a form from, write it, hell. Now, each villanelle has 5 tercets, bounce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's comprised of 3 line stanzas followed by 1 quatrain, and we've got this one. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we've got 5 tercets and then 1 quatrain, which is 4 lines. And you'll notice the rhyme scheme. And I'm not going to go into these in details because I'm not going to belabor the point. But this is what a villanelle sounds like. And one of the jokes here is it's provincial shoes. Provençal is a region in France, and the villanelle is a French poem. And it's too tight for English feet is a pun. Okay, it's French shoes are too tight for English feet, but what he's saying is the meter of the villanelle is too tight for the feet, the iambs, the anapaests, the trochees, the spondees, the feet that we describe in English poetry. So he's kind of making a joke there. So the next one is a sonnet, and you probably recognize sonnets. So I'm going to pause here. This is the last request I'm going to ask from everybody, and I'll give it a minute. But I want you to tell me, who is Billy Connolly? No, not the comic. So again, this is my way of taking roll today, making sure that everybody sticks through the entire hour. So I'm just going to take a moment and ask everybody to respond to who is Billy Connolly. It's fine if you want to look it up and tell me who he is. And while you're looking it up, I will read you Billy Connolly's poem called Sonnet. And this is a sonnet. And he must have been very frustrated with his students when he wrote this. All we need is 14 lines. Well, 13 now. And after this next one, just a dozen. To launch a little ship on love's storm-tossed seas. Then only 10 more left, like rows of beans. How easily it goes, unless you get Elizabeth and insist the iambic bongos must be played and rhymes positioned at the end of lines, 1 for every station of the cross. But hang on here while we make the turn. In the final 6, where all will be resolved, where longing and heartache will find an end, where Laura will tell Petrarch to put down his pen, take off those crazy medieval tights, blow out the lights, come at last to bed. 1, 2, did they move? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So while you're looking up who Billy Connolly is, he's made fun of the sonnet form, because in the very first line, he says, all we need is 14 lines. Well, 13 now. Okay, he's written the first line, so now he only needs 13. The next line, and after this, next one, just a dozen. Okay, I've got 2 of the 14 done. To launch a little ship on love's storm-tossed seas. Sonnets were traditionally poems of love. They were poems written by one person and given to usually his beloved. Then only 10 more lines, like rows of beans. So now we've gone back to something mundane, anodyne. Rows of beans, generally not associated with love. How easily it goes, unless you get Elizabeth. And what he means is, if you get all Elizabethan on me, a sonnet's going to be really hard. But if you don't mind the whole Shakespearean trope that we're all laboring under, how easily it goes, unless you get Elizabeth and insist the iambic bongos must be played. So if you're not too concerned with ba-bum, 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 but soft what light on yonder window breaks. If you don't insist on that, sonnets are a lot easier. And rhymes positioned at the end of lines, if you don't make sure that every end rhyme happens, one for every station of the cross. And again, that's a Catholic reference. I won't get into that. But hang on here while we make the turn. And here is, this is really important. And I do want you to remember this. In a sonnet, we have something called a volta. And that's an Italian, it's Italian. I've been listening to too much news. It's an Italian term that means shift or turn. And in a sonnet, the first 8 or 10 lines will lay out some sort of problem. I love you and you don't love me back. The volta is like, but something will improve. Somehow my love will be better. The sonnet always has that turn. It's called a volta, V-O-L-T-A or V-O-L-T-E. I can't remember, to be perfectly honest. But hang on here while we make the turn. This is Billy Connolly talking about the joke. It's the turn, the volta we get into the final 6 lines where all will be resolved. So he's making an allusion, an indirect reference to a very specific part of the sonnet form, the volta, where longing and heartache will find an end, where Laura will tell Petrarch to put down his pen. And here he's alluding to 2 of the most famous almost lovers in poetry. Petrarch, an Italian poet, he lays eyes on Laura. She's either married or getting married, and she's 14 when he sees her. He never meets her formally. He falls in love with her, and he writes all this beautiful poetry to Laura, the beautiful woman of his imagination, where Laura will tell Petrarch to put down his pen, take off those crazy medieval tights, blow out the lights, and come at last to bed. So he's having a lot of fun with the sonnet form. He's making a lot of allusions to traditional items found within the sonnet, but it still is a sonnet. So Ray says, I only found the stand-up comic. I know, and Billy Connolly is one of my favorite stand-up comics. And Sybil said he's a retired Scottish stand-up comedian. The big Yens in his nickname, stand-up comedian. Billy Connolly was also a poet laureate of Ireland. He is a poet. So it's not the stand-up comic, but so far I've got, so Ray, Sybil, Vanessa, Love, and Madison. I need to get responses from everybody because these are the people who get credit for attending the entire class. So let's go for a few more, and I'm just quickly going to go through these. And this is in your Work 14 module, your Week 14 module, so that you've got a sense of, I want to look for a couple of prose poems. So here we have poetry forms, various examples of, this is prose. This prose is, I'm speaking prose right now. Prose poetry still has poetic forms, allusions, similes, metaphors, synecdoche, metonymy, symbolism, but it doesn't necessarily rhyme. So here's a prose poem. Like a monstrous snail, a toilet slides into a living room on a track of wet, demanding to be loved. It is impossible, and we tender our sincerest regrets. In the book of the heart, there is no mention made of plumbing. And though we have spent our intimacy many times with you, you belong to an unfortunate reference, which we would rather not embrace. The toilet slides away. You could do a lot of analysis with this prose poem, but think of the metaphor and the simile, like a monstrous snail. We've got a simile there. A toilet slides into a living room on a track of wet, demanding to be loved. I just think that's a hilarious poem, and I wanted to share that with you. So that's an example of a prose poem. An ode is always something that's addressing something else, and it's very serious. And one of the most famous odes is an ode on a Grecian urn. And this is the very beginning of an ode by Wordsworth. So odes tend to be fairly long. You're not going to run into a short ode, and I wasn't going to put an entire one there, but here's an ode. And notice each one has a description. I cut and pasted. I didn't have time to write my own. So here are descriptions of what a villanelle is, a sonnet, a prose poem, an ode. Then we have a narrative poem, and a narrative poem tells a story. So this is, again, just the first verse of The Idylls of the King, which is a narrative poem. And we have a description of here what a narrative poem is. You've probably heard of haikus. You probably know what they are. So here's a description of what haikus are. And if we'd had more time, I was going to have us scan this one today. But here's the first haiku. From time to time, the clouds give rest to the moon beholders. From time to time, 4, 4, and to the moon beholders. 4, 4, and 5. So here we have haiku. Then we have a sestina. Here's the definition of a sestina. And I'm going to zoom past that and and then we're going to go back to the sestina, and then I'll let you go. Here's an elegy, and it's by Auden. It's a very famous poem, and if you've seen Four Weddings and a Funeral, that poem is in it. And then we have a ballad, and the link doesn't work here, but a ballad is, lots of popular songs are still ballads. They've got a refrain, and they tell a story, and then they go back to the refrain. And this is a ballad written by a group called the Kingston Trio about a man who pays his 5 cents to get on a subway, but they've just changed the taxes and you have to pay another 5 cents to get off the subway, and he can't get off it. And I'm just going to, you can hear it. Well, let me tell you of the story of a man named Charlie on a tragic and fateful day. He put 10 cents in his pocket, kissed his wife and family, went to ride on the MTA. So that's the beginning of the ballad. And then the refrain is the one that you sing over and over again. Will he ever return? No, he'll never return. And his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. So go to YouTube, listen to the Kingston Trio singing this. This is an elegy. This is Elizabeth Bishop, one of the most extraordinary poets of the 20th century is Elizabeth Bishop. And I'm going to leave you with this one, the elegy, Funeral Blues by Auden. And an elegy is always about someone or something that has died. So it can be about a person, it can be about a nation, it can be about a war, it can be about a friendship. So this is Funeral Blues, and you probably heard it at some point. Again, it's in a couple of movies, famously in Four Weddings and a Funeral. And this was the elegy that Auden wrote for his lover who had died. Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east, my west, my working week and my Sunday best, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted out. Now put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good. And I just want you to notice one thing. Notice that throughout the poem, he starts out very small: clocks, dogs, pianos, coffin. And at the end of this elegy, he wants to end the entire universe. And traditional British funerals for important people, where there would be policemen with their white gloves. And he's kind of making an allusion to, in the 1930s and 40s, it became a thing to have planes right overhead, and usually it was for advertisement. So he's making a kind of ironic allusion to advertise that my lover is dead. There are countless websites online to look at to understand this famous elegy, but that's one that I thought you should be familiar with. So again, here are examples of each of the poems that I want you to go find on poetry.org. There is a PowerPoint, if not on the assignment page, then in week 14 where the assignment is. If you click on that, there's a PowerPoint there. These are assignments that I've borrowed from an online poetry site. I tweaked them a little bit. I did not create the PowerPoint. I just want to say that I did not create that PowerPoint, but it is helpful. Please look at it. The assignment is due all day today. You've got till 10 o'clock at night to do it. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me. And please do vote before you leave whether or not you would like to spend next week on Shakespeare's sonnets, or would you prefer to look at popular poetry from more poetry slams. There's some poetry from poetry slams that are on our week 14 module. So we can look at contemporary poetry, or we can look at Shakespeare's sonnets. So please go ahead and make your vote for that. You can also email me later, but it would be easier if I just saw everybody here. And I will make sure and mark down the people who responded to my question about Billy Connolly. That's going to be our attendance for the day. I am happy to do either Shakespeare sonnets or contemporary poetry. Rap music is poetry. I'm not going to be looking at rap music that's got a lot of foul language in it, but there's a lot of really amazing poetry, and you could argue that rap artists are the most popular and successful and innovative poets today, because all songs are poetry. But if you notice, if you listen to popular music, most of the poetry in popular songs is very brief. They're going to have a refrain and they'll have a couple of lyrics that are cute, but they're not really very long. If you see the lyrics, it's like, well, there's not much of a poem there. Where rap artists create very, very long poems, sometimes even epically long poems. And they are really the harbingers of a new type of poetic style. And some of them are very gifted poets. So make sure and leave in the comments whether you would like popular poetry. Okay, I'm seeing contemporary. All right, I get it. Shakespeare, popular poetry is in. That's groovy. All right, so this poetry forms various examples is in your week 14 module. The assignment is there. I'm going to double check and make sure that PowerPoint is working. It was working last night when I checked it. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you're not going too stir crazy. You've only got another, let's see, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Technically another 7 days, because I think next week, Thursday and Friday, I think they're reading days. So the end of the semester is upon us, and don't take the governor's opening up of things too seriously. Not yet. Hang in there, gang. And I will talk at you next week, and don't hesitate to email me. Cheers.